All right, so thanks for joining the Leveraging AI for Your Education Career webinar. What we're focusing on here is basically different ways, kind of three different approaches to how we can leverage AI, artificial intelligence, in our careers. So we're going to be looking at it from the lens and perspective of actually being teachers, and of course, thinking about, well, what can we do within the classroom and how can this assist us and make our lives easier, which is honestly my main goal with any implementation along these lines, is thinking about, well, how can we make things happen, more quickly, but also still with great quality, and give us a little bit of either time back, some energy, and maybe even potentially save us some money, which is great. So that's the first aspect and area. Secondly, thinking about, of course, for a lot of my transitioning teachers out there, how we can use it to look at what we're doing within our own career journey and job search and all those things, and how we can use this kind of as a launch point into basically building our kind of professional repertoire. And we'll get into some of those examples and what that could potentially look like, how you can use it. And then the third piece and component, which is something I don't necessarily hear a lot of people talk about, but I'm personally in this kind of realm of it, I guess, if you want to call it that, is basically once you've made a shift or a pivot, or even if you decide to stay on your current job wherever you are, what can you do uh, with regard to implementation of AI, these tools that we're talking about, to basically be an asset regardless of where you go, and how can you leverage skill set, knowledge base of using these tools to basically kind of carve out space for yourself and become somewhat of an authority. And ultimately, we think about things like job security, and well, how can I separate myself and make sure that I'm putting out my best work and actually showing up every single day in a way that whoever is making more of the decisions will look at me and say, well, we definitely want that person to stay with us, and we want to keep that that relationship going. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those strategies and how we can implement there, what I'm personally doing, and how you can leverage as well. So let's jump into it. Right. So the first thing we want to talk about is basically, well, what is it? What are we talking about? When we talk about AI, it's, this big, kind of looming cloud, um, really big, grandiose idea that I think honestly scares a lot of people, based on what we hear and, the media and things that you see online. Then, you might get a little nervous, but let's break it down. So what we're talking about here in particular is one kind of aspect of technology, of artificial intelligence, of AI, which is more of the text-based focus, right? So you've probably at this point heard of ChatGPT, for example, being really popular. And what that basically looks like is we input text into like a search bar, and that search bar or bot or whatever you want to call it gives us a response. Okay. Now, the difference between something like this and say Google, right? You can go into Google and, type in a question, how do I, make pepperoni pizza or whatever. What it's going to do in that aspect is, Google is going to give you a bunch of sources, a bunch of links to websites where you can go and you can find that recipe that you're looking for. The difference with generative artificial intelligence, or generative AI, or the GPT, which stands for generative pre-trained transformer, is that it's going to respond to you almost in the same way that we would respond to each other in conversation, but it's going to be text-based. And just to kind of give a breakdown of, some of this terminology, Generative pre-trained transformer. The generative part just means that it produces and can come up with basically more creative aspects, right? Just like if you're asking me a question, I'm going to think of something and I'm going to process and I'm going to generate a response, right? And provide it back to you. The pre-trained part is basically just talking about uh, that these systems that we're talking about, they have information, right? Just like we have our brains, the chatbots and AI that we're talking about, ChatGPT, whatever the case is, it also kind of has a brain. Its brain usually is the internet. So basically, what it does is pull information from the internet, generate a response to you, and sends you back some information, right? It sends you back a response in text format. And it looks like, you're having a text message conversation with somebody. And just to kind of highlight a few things related to um, its use case in terms of language processing. And then so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the text-based component of it is basically that, again, it's going to respond to you in a text kind of format, just like if we were, texting on our phones or sending emails back and forth. But what it can essentially do with the information that we provide and where it's able to pull from, right, the internet or wherever, it can also generate and create different pieces of content. So emails, different reports, things like that. It can produce a lot of those things, templates, but it's all based on what we say to it. And we'll get into that as well. So, big question, why AI? What's the point? Why does it matter? Why should we even pay attention? Why should you care? Very valid question. The first thing certainly is consideration for time, right? Time is, our greatest asset. Our greatest asset. You can't get it back. So when we're using this effectively, we end up getting to a point where we can save time, right? We can make things happen a lot more quickly than previously. So you imagine how long it would take you to draft an email to someone. You might have to have, a second set of eyes, somebody review your email. Hey, do you what do you think about the tone of this? Is it coming across a certain way? What do you think about this word? Should I use a synonym, whatever? With AI, you can basically go through the process of creating something like that in a matter of seconds, literally. And then you can always review, which is always recommended for sure. Like, don't just pull the information that it gives you. Definitely go through it and make sure that, changes are made and anything in the text that needs to be addressed is addressed. But the initial generation of the content, right, the creation of it, it happens like that, right? You don't necessarily have to really dig so much into your brain and kind of rack and rack within yourself and use a lot of energy, basically expend so much on doing some of these tasks that might not necessarily be your favorite things, and they might not necessarily be like the most meaningful things for you to you at certain points. And then, of course, when we get into more of the technical side of things, being able to pull from that resource bank of the internet when we're talking into these tools, it can basically kind of leverage some of the expert information that we might not necessarily have ourselves and produce, something that we might not necessarily have been able to formulate just on our own. And the second part of it is consistency. And with that, definitely thinking about, when we produce things, right, we want to produce things of the same quality, high quality, I assume, every single time, right? We want to replicate, that same effort every single time. But the cool thing about, using technology is that, it doesn't really get tired. And it doesn't necessarily have, too many hiccups outside of glitches and things like that that we always have to deal with. But typically, you're going to essentially get the same output, that you put in. So either way, it's going to, it's going to show up and deliver the things that you need regardless of what day it is. And then the final piece, I think, is culminating for all of this, which is productivity. We all want to be more productive and to produce and create more, make things happen more efficiently and effectively, and continue to keep rolling out, whether you're a teacher or, working for a company, or, you're a parent, any of those things. You want to be productive in every aspect of what you're doing. And with AI and a lot of the efficiency and the things that we're going to look at during this webinar, you'll see how the productivity can be a major component, and how AI can be leveraged for that. All right. So the big question is, well, how do I do it? What do I do? Where do I start? So the first kind of initial thing that happens, and I mentioned this before, related to, how we kind of have these conversations with the technology, which I know sounds kind of strange. Am I talking to a robot? Kind of. But thinking about that, I think the first thing to point out is the term prompt. Right? You're going to hear prompt and prompting a lot when anybody's talking about, AI and using any of these tools, especially when we're dealing with the text-based components. Refining prompts and what does a prompt even mean? Like, what is it? So a prompt is basically a directive that you give to, the AI tool, the chatbot, whatever. It's basically what you tell it to do, what you tell it to produce, what you ask it to create. And I've kind of positioned it, at least from a starting standpoint, of considering two buckets, right? Statements and questions. So we can basically prompt or tell the AI tool, or, whatever we're working with, the chatbot, to provide and produce whatever it is that we need by making a statement, and it basically drawing from that statement and churning out whatever it is that we said was needed at the time, or by asking questions, right? And just like you would pose a question to me or anybody else, with that, we wanted to then respond with an answer to that question. So let's take a look at a little bit of this. All right, so with statements, of course, we're basically saying, do this, period, right? It just ends there. There's not, any inquiry really attached to it. There's no question. So here's an example of one that I actually did recently and input into a bot. I said, create a catchy name for a pizza restaurant with the word nice in it, right? That's all I told it. What it gave me is Nice Slice Pizzeria, right? So you can see that change. And I mean, it literally generated this immediately, automatically, almost, I would say, within a matter of, less than 5 seconds, right? How long would it take me personally to think of that, and to come up with, multiple? And it did produce several different ideas, and you can always go back and regenerate and say, no, I don't like that one. Let me do another one. And it will, oblige you in that. All right, let's take a look at questions. Now, of course, with questions, you're ending with that punctuation, right? Where you pose some type of inquiry, and it will respond and oblige you in that. And myself, I just use an example based on my own personal life, kind of set up in situation of being plant-based. So I asked, what are some high protein vegan snack ideas? And it honestly gave me about 14. I pulled 2 that were kind of not the norm of what I've heard. They were kind of interesting. So here it gives me, vegan jerky and quinoa salad. And you can even build on some of these things and going beyond this. But let's say that I want to make my own vegan jerky. I can then request an actual recipe for it. And without me having to go into a website and read through and look at ads or anything like that, it will formulate a recipe for vegan jerky, probably multiple ones if I asked, and then give me, exact ingredient amounts, and everything that I need to get, and maybe even following up, with additional prompting. It can give me like nutritional values and stuff like that if I was, going to go that far. But here's where we are with that related to questions. So that's our how, right? We're talking about prompts, which is basically just us thinking what it is that we need, making a statement to basically get it, or asking a question for it to be provided. All right, so here's the thing that I'm sure everybody, if you're tuning into this, you're on here right now or catching the replay, that you really want to know, right? Well, what about education? How do I leverage this for this space, right? This world that I'm in. So I'm going to highlight three components, as I mentioned before at the beginning of this session. We're going to focus and look at. Let's consider what we're doing as far as like being in the classroom. So creating in the classroom, transitioning from the classroom, and then working beyond the classroom. Okay. In the classroom, from the classroom, beyond the classroom. Those are kind of three pathways of focus. So let's start by thinking about, well, what's possible? What can we do in the classroom? So within the classroom, we can definitely create different templates and pull sources and ideas, because again, right, if we're talking to these tools, if they are pre-trained transformers, right, pre-trained technology, that's going to generate and produce and provide us with answers and solutions to our problems, the generative aspect, right, generative, pre-trained, transformer, GPT, then for us, what we need to think about is, well, what do I need? Right? What do I need support with? And the way that I would identify that as a teacher in particular is, where can I save more time, right? Going back to those benefits of it and the why of why we even should care about this. Where can I save more time? What things might just be like, kind of asks based on me being in either the school that I'm in, the district I'm in, whatever. Because I know that there are definitely a bunch of teachers, and I can recall being one of them, who, we are just required to be able to produce a lesson plan or, upon request, right? Where's your lesson plan? Where's your lesson plan? Post it outside your classroom, that type of thing. And sorry, for anybody that has to go through this, I promise as a school administrator, I didn't do this, but it was kind of like a gotcha situation sometimes where, if you didn't necessarily have it, on hand, hard copy or something like that, like I've heard of instances where like that can be an issue and you can like get in trouble. So needless to say, outside of, all the woes there, generating lesson plans and things like that are possible using these tools, right? So based on the topic of study, and maybe even like standards based, right? If you want to, if you're depending on what state you're in, I'm not going to throw out any standards or anything like that, but you can consider, if you're creating your lesson plans or you have to produce those things, then this could be a tool to assist you with that, where, you can basically input in your prompting, right? With, these tools, whatever you're using, you can basically input your prompt to give you back a lesson plan based solely on, what you're actually doing, but you can maybe provide bullet points or just kind of simple, few word statements of what the requirements are for that lesson or for that unit or whatever. And then from there, you can have something produced that you can go back then, of course, and go through yourself and change around and maneuver, and manipulate however you need to in whatever way you see fit. But from there, you don't necessarily have to completely start from scratch and, put in so much time. You know what you're going to be teaching, You just have to have that document, right? In some cases. Also thinking about activities, a lot of question around, well, I'm teaching this, or, my students are interested in this. What activities can we do? And, I'm somebody who was heavily in, the STEM space and always looking for, different engineering challenges and things like that. So you can certainly use generative AI to find access to these types of resources and activities, and give you, not just the ideas for it, but even give you like the breakdown of kind of like what that looks like, the tools and things that you will need. And then you can also create alignments with your lesson plans, right? So from that lesson plan, you know, you might prompt, I need a lesson plan for this science lesson, for this topic of study, this grade level, whatever. And it generates that. Can you also provide me with additional activities to support my students who might struggle with this topic, right? Differentiation practices, and it can go a little bit further. Related to that, of course, is going to be resources. The tool that I'm going to show, which is the EduHustle bot that I've set up, actually does allow for links, hyperlinks in the formulated responses from the AI. So if you ask for, links to sources that will take you outside of the bot, into the internet, it will do that. And that's a great kind of tool, because really considering, asking a specific question as a prompt, what resources are there out there for student or teachers who are trying to save money in out-of-pocket expenses. That's a major one, right? I actually have a free resource on the EduHustle site that's called Monetary Resources for Teachers. But we're actually going to go through that a little bit later here as an example. But again, you can access that, and with using AI in these tools, then you can just go directly through the links. And then, of course, it can just give you a lot of different kind of creative, interesting examples of things. And then thinking about strategies, I know I mentioned differentiation before. You can definitely pull from there. I mean, of course, folks being master educators and things like that, and really having, solid background in pedagogy, you might not necessarily need to see that, but also, you just kind of never know what you might come across. So you can always kind of dig through and just see, what types of things, might come about from this conversation that you would have with this robot. All right, so let's think about transitioning from the classroom. Now here we can dig directly into talking about, more of the professional types of documentation and resources, of course, resumes, cover letters, but even going further to dig into prompting that is going to be more focused on you as, as a professional, as a person, and thinking about like, well, what job titles would make sense for you, not necessarily just for teachers, which is, are very common. We get like the same job titles over and over. Teachers have, these transferable skills, but actually asking, well, how do these transferable skills actually align, and provide examples, right? You can tell it, give me 5 to 10 examples of how this transferable skill as a teacher would relate to, moving into the ed tech industry, or, like customer success role, or whatever it is that you're looking at, right? And it can become more, just specific in nature. And it's not necessarily so ambiguous, right? We want it to be a little bit more to the point and clear. And again, saving that time, and making things more efficient for us, and then ultimately making us more productive in our job search. And then the last thing, process mapping strategy. So, thinking about the career journey, especially if you've, kind of been on that pathway for some time, thinking about, well, what can I do outside of the classroom? You can definitely dig into a lot of those things with, AI support, to kind of give you an idea of what that pathway and trajectory could look like for you, right? Thinking about, where have I been? What is my background? What areas of expertise do I have? And then ultimately, what do those areas of expertise, what is that background? What ultimately can I create and move into based on these competencies that I have right now, right? And that can either be with upskilling or getting another credential or not, right? Thinking about, well, yeah, I mean, I have my master's degree, I have this, you know 15, 20 years experience. What else is out there, and how do I make it happen? That's another key component I want to highlight, is not necessarily just saying what jobs are available, but how do I make it happen, right? How do I move into that space by leveraging what I already have? And talking to some of these tools, it can give you some of that advice. Now let's think about beyond the classroom. And this is where I can share a little bit of an anecdotal component of the story. So when we're talking about thinking beyond the classroom, the word asset really jumps out at me, because especially when you're moving from the education system or teaching space into more of the industry space, uh, there's a mindset shift. Things change where in the system or in the schools and things like that, it's you're definitely focused on supports for stakeholders and naturally the students, right? And we want them to be successful. Whenever you are working more so in the kind of industry side of things, let's say you've made that pivot from teaching and you got the job, and like, okay, so now what? How do I stay here? Um, you want to set yourself apart. One of the things that I'm personally doing is using AI to do that, where my knowledge and just interest in AI, which is similar to how I'm just sharing this webinar with you all, going through this process. I'm doing pretty much the same thing internally, in the spaces that I'm working with in the teams, and being able to produce things like this and share information that people can implement and apply directly, is going to be golden, I think. Honestly, looking down the line and thinking about where a lot of these things are going. So with that, you also can think about looking at those benefits, right? Making things more efficient, more productive, saving time. How can you do that? Generating things like templates, looking at processes, and maybe even like prompting AI to say, what is the most efficient process for, this cycle, or, whatever it is that we're doing, as a team, as an organization. And it can give you a lot of information that, again, that is going to pull from the internet. And you can also refine a lot of those prompts that you input to say, well, how does the top 10% of companies, uh, you know, basically maneuver with, this area of their business or their brand or whatever, right? What is the marketing strategy of Coca-Cola, or whatever, and being able to then kind of look at that and say, well, you know what, we can leverage some of this broader scope information, and then how can you implement that into what you're doing to provide solutions for issues and problem areas that might happen within wherever you are, right? How can you step into more of a consultative role, right, and be somebody who can say, well, we can actually use this tool right here to think about what it is that we're having trouble with, right, as an organization, a company, whatever. And then from there, you can then kind of assume a little bit more of that leadership type of quality, which honestly, that's always going to be valuable. But if you can do it by leveraging something like this, and how it's just from you kind of messing around and learning, you can step in, especially as a teacher, and basically do some introductory type of work, some, dare I say, instruction, and walk people through the process and say, like, this is what I've learned doing this, and I'll show you and share this information But within that, you got to know that you're making yourself more valuable to that organization, to that group, to that team. All right. So now the probably my favorite part, honestly. I love disseminating the information and sharing all those resources and things like that. But I want to get active. So I try to make this very practical. We're going to go through some prompts that I've kind of already thought that, these things might be kind of best suited for the audience. And again, you can kind of run with these things as you see fit. But at the same time, with this webinar, you will get access to the ebook that I'm going to pull a couple of these prompts from. And that ebook is AI for transitioning teachers, and 100 prompts, over 100 prompts rather, to use right now. So it's an ebook that kind of chronicles more of an in-depth breakdown, thinking about AI and implementation. And it's not that long. It's, I believe, less than 20 pages. But toward the end of it, a good number of those pages actually are actual prompts that you can literally just copy and paste directly into the chatbot that I'm going to be using, which is the EduHustle chatbot, EduHustle AI, or Eddie for short. And from there, you can just kind of take things and go. And also note that whenever you get the ebook, the link to that chatbot is on the first page. So you just click that link, go to the bot, and then you can just start interacting. And then, who knows where that could lead. So I will pause there, and I'm going to switch over to the bot here. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Okay. All right, here we go. Everybody can see that? Okay, cool, great. All right, so here is the bot, Eddie, as I call it, the EduHustle AI chatbot. And again, this is set up. It was set up, honestly, primarily focusing on education, ed tech, and entrepreneurship supports. So if you're a transitioning teacher, or working in the education space, or even considering creating something as an entrepreneur, then this would be basically set up and preempted to be able to support you, right? So the whole pre-trained aspect of it is that the prompt is pulling directly from and focus on supports for the education space. With that, let's jump right in and start prompting. So when you go in, it's just like any other chatbot or text conversation. You got a little bar down here where you can type in what you want. You hit enter, and we'll see what's going to happen. So let's actually pull a prompt. I want to start with thinking about kind of the progression that we went through of looking at in the classroom, then transitioning from the classroom, and then building beyond the classroom. So let's start with in the classroom. And I'm going to copy and paste because I already have these set up. Try to be prepared. So I went ahead and copied and pasted, but I'm going to read this aloud too, just so everybody can hear it. The prompt is, and it's a statement: develop a lesson plan for a middle school physical science lesson focusing on thermodynamics. Okay, this is just something I came up with as an idea. And let's see what we get. All right, so you can see that, that took, all of 6 or 7 seconds or so. And again, keep in mind, this is not necessarily going to be a one size fits all, straightforward, just take it and run type of thing. You will, begin to get more comfortable with the prompting and this is my experience, where you're going to get more refined in your approach and what you're saying, how you're saying it, what you're asking, kind of the steps, and even including small kind of like nuanced pieces. Like here, you could even add in again, like thinking about whatever state you're in, whatever standard, and it would reformulate, populate that there, and then building out even more capacity, right? We can have all this, and then I know we were talking about before, like activities. I list one here, but I could also say as a question, can you provide more alternative activities to support all levels of learning in my class? Right. And it's going to just go ahead and give us more. Right. And of course, it's going to break it down, thinking about how we learn, the different phases and modalities and things like that. So visual learners, kinesthetic, so on and so forth. And even going into talking about some enrichment supports. Now, here's one step I want to take it further, because I know I did mention the possibility of having access to linked resources. So if we want those things, we just simply tell it to give it to us, or we ask for it, right? The statements or questions. Provide other resources related to the topic, include links to the websites to access. Right? And there we go. We're going to get some, of course, some things that are popular and we're probably familiar with, and maybe some things that we're not familiar with. And from here, all this purple text that you see, it's hyperlinked, right? So it's telling you exactly what it is, and then you can click directly to go to it. All right. So a lot of different possibilities here. That's just a pretty simple example, but you can continue to build on it. And the nice thing about this particular bot is that if you kind of get stuck or you don't really know what to ask next, it will give you sample prompts that you can just continue to go forward with on your own. Like you can just decide, either tell me more, or, I like this idea right here, this prompt. Let me just click that and see what it gives me. Right. So continue to formulate those things, and, it can be a rabbit hole. Right. So that is the aspect of creating in the classroom. Right. And you can, again, the creative part of it is immense, right? There's so much to it. You can continue to kind of, dig through and just come up with different ideas, and input your own kind of ideas and thoughts. I have this idea for an activity. How can I accomplish this, or how can I execute this? And, it'll strategize with you. So, all right, going from that, one of the things I also wanted to tap into, and I know we mentioned before the monetary resources. I want to show that and actually have some of those resources populate here. But on top of that as well, I want to show that even though this is text-based, you can get, somewhat, diagram form. So you can produce tables that you can, populate here, and then just literally pull directly from this, so that you can have, for later use, drop them onto a Google Doc or whatever and share them with other folks. So here's another prompt. I'm just going to copy and paste for the sake of time, is create a table with rows and columns. So kind of being specific, using that verbiage and saying like, this is what a table is, what I'm talking about. Create a table with rows and columns showing monetary resources for teachers to supplement out-of-pocket spending in the classroom, comma, include links to each source in the table. Right. And then it generates this nice little table for us. Here's your funding source. So the different, places and organizations that are potentially offering funding, award amounts, deadlines, and then, of course, those links that we asked for as well. right? So you can take that whole thing and just copy it and save it for later, or go in and implement now. And then again, you can continue to build out here and maybe even ask questions directly to either some of these resources directly. How do I, fill out a grant application for, donors choose, or what does this look like? Can you show me can you lay out the process, or, give me the bullet point steps that I need to follow in order to have the best chance to get this money, or whatever the case is. So let's continue on, just continue kind of building out. So that's, again, in the classroom. Now let's think about transitioning from the classroom, which is, definitely a major one. So I'm going to start with one that, I think is pretty popular, and I think a lot of folks would, be be happy with seeing, and just what populates here. Let's talk about a resume, right? So this one, I'm just going to go ahead and type it in. I'm going to tell it, generate a sample resume for a teacher with 10 years experience teaching. I'm going to give it a specific grade band and content area, just for the sake of doing this. I just want to be a little bit more specific, so it's kind of realistic. 10 years experience teaching grades 6 through 8 mathematics. Okay. Let's just actually use that, and then we can build from there. All right, very vague, right? Now, building on this, I can go back now, right, and add in a little bit of extra. I am a transitioning teacher seeking a role in curriculum development for math. Okay, so it's going to give me some examples there. Now, faulty prompt, right? I didn't give it exactly, or say exactly what I needed. So I'm going to go back up here. I'm going to take this first section, right? Generate sample resume. But then I'm also going to add in here, right? I'm going to infuse some of these words. Generate a sample resume for a transitioning teacher with 10 years experience teaching grade 6 through 8 mathematics. Interested in a new role in curriculum development. Let's see what that gives us. And again, just messing around and considering, what we're doing here. Right? It's going to break those things down. And the nice thing too about this, and I mean, you can take a look at it, it's just a pretty vague template. The more you refine the actual prompt itself, the better the output's going to be, right? So I'm doing really generic, basic inputs, but with a lot of this, you can refine things. Like, you can actually put the verbiage for, applicant tracking system, passing or proficient, where we know that, a lot of resumes and things like that are going to go through a system. Now, one step you could take to even go further is taking your actual resume, not the personal information, right? One caveat I always say is, and I can't necessarily pinpoint or point out examples and situations that I've personally seen where things have gone bad, other than using some of the images and voice modulators. But when it comes to technology in general, be mindful of what you put in terms of your personal information, right? Or your contact information, any, identifiers that you might not necessarily want people to have. So your general information, like all the, your work history and stuff like that, fine, because you're uploading, resumes and stuff like that pretty consistently. But on different platforms, it might not be as secure. So just be careful. But you can input, your education, work history, that type of thing. And what I would actually ask it to do is to analyze your resume, right? Analyze my resume and provide feedback on how I can make this more relevant to curriculum development, if that's what you want to do, right? And from there, it can give you ideas, tips and pointers that you can then use to implement and kind of reformulate what you've written. Or you can basically ask it to reformulate it for you, right? And from here, let me try this. I'm going to take what it gave me as an example, and I'm going to, go ahead and add in what I just basically said. Analyze the following resume, provide tips for how I can improve resume for ATS and to have a better chance securing a an interview and job and curriculum development. And I'm going to add something a little bit more specific here, just so it digs a little bit further. And a job in curriculum development for grades 9 through 12, math at an ed tech. It's going to be, there we go. And this is just really just to show an example of what the formulation of like those tips and things like that can look like for you. But using basically what it already gave me, and kind of turning it back on itself. Right. So here are some tips, and focus on that grades 9 through 12 math. It will highlight all these things. Right. And then from here, here's an interesting thing that you can also do again, like what I mentioned before, taking its tips and responses. And rather than you going through the process of implementing yourself, we want to save some time. We want to be proficient and be able to just review what it gives us later on. And then, who's to say that you don't want to go to like a professional resume writer, right? You could do that, right? It's possible. I have ties to one who's amazing and a great team and company. Can get you 20% off if you like. But if you want to do it yourself, here it is. So let's go from here and say, now that we have these tips and kind of tools, I can say reformulate the resume, include the tips. I just want to make sure I use the right verbiage. Yeah. Includes the tips for improving that you have provided. So now it's going to just continue on with this thread and just repopulate the resume with the stuff that it's telling me that I should add. That way I don't have to add it myself. And there we go, right? Because you can even see now, before there was no objective. Now it's laying this out. And there we have that. All right. And again, it's going to provide you samples and just an exemplar type of setup, but a lot of this stuff you can kind of pull out and then just kind of plug and chug, your information directly into this, and you'll have at least, if nothing else, a good kind of solid launch point to kind of get you going. The last thing I wanted to show during this kind of practical section of it, actually, not the last thing, I wanted to show one more unrelated to the resume. I definitely wanted to dig into the resume because I know it's a major topic when we're talking about, job seekers and transitioning teachers in particular. But there was another prompt before I get to my final one here that I wanted to share with you all, which is thinking about within that job search, right? Once you have that resume and all those things, and we're always talking about, you need to tailor your search and you need to narrow your focus and all that stuff. So once you do that, then what, right? I'll use a really common one that always comes up: customer success managers, or just customer success, client success in general. Is a kind of a common area that a lot of transitioning teachers kind of get funneled to. So yeah, let's say that you're set on that you definitely want to go into customer success, right? Not deterring anybody from that. Here is a pointer or example of how you can leverage AI for what it is that you're trying to do. Now, here's a prompt: copy and paste, save a little time. Focusing on that, because a lot of times it's like, well, where do I look? Who even is hiring potentially for this area? After you've done all the research and you're like, I'm in. So here's a prompt: how do I identify companies and organizations that would benefit from my teaching background? And okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. My customer success one is next, but this is still in the vein of transitioning. So thinking about your teaching background, notice there's no specificity right here. I didn't say what my teaching background is. I'm just starting, right, to get this thing flowing for myself so that I can basically create this conversation where I can be more specific, more particular as this goes. And then I can get to a point kind of like thinking, you start out with this, wide funnel, and then you begin to narrow down and you get to, right, that final kind of component of what you want. Right. So it's going to give you some tips for, how you can identify these companies and organizations. And what I'll do, if you haven't checked out EdSurge, you're doing yourself a disservice. Definitely check it out. It's like one of my favorite resources, probably my favorite resource, especially when you talk about ed tech. So I'm going to build off of this. And I'm going to use this prompt. Again, I'm going to refine a little bit. How do I identify companies and organizations that would benefit from my teaching background? I want to focus a little bit more. How do I identify companies and organizations benefit from my teaching background? If my goal is to become a customer success manager. Let's see what they give us. Okay. Pretty similar stuff, but I think that they started to highlight a little bit more focus. But I want to build on this too. So this, to me, if I say, oh, well, these tips, they're not enough, right? And you can, again, examples and things like that. How can I tailor my application materials, all that type of stuff. And you provide a list of potential companies that I can use my teaching experience to become a customer. success. Here. Right, it's going to formulate some companies. Now, there's no guarantee, of course, that there are any jobs there, but here's a thought. And then you can build off of this too and think about, well, what are the relative competencies of a customer success manager? Thinking about your resume, right? How can I align to that? Just in the same way we just did the curriculum development thing, talking about math. You could do the same thing here with customer success and build that out and really get a kind of a gauge and a feel for ultimately what these things are, right? What this role is, if it's a suitable fit, does it make sense? But just really digging through, right? Even asking some of the simple stuff, right? What does the day-to-day for a customer success manager look like? Right. And then I'll just allowing it to provide the information directly based on that prompt versus having to dig through and sift through different resources and read it. And also, take everything here with a grain of salt, of course. But again, this is essentially pulling from the internet, which is probably going to be a lot of the things that you might come across anyway. Now, getting to the last part of it, which talking about the customer success thing, I just want to get to. I jumped the gun a little bit earlier, so I apologize. But I'm going to implement or kind of input one last prompt here related to that. And this is thinking beyond the classroom. So again, let's say that you land that job that you've been focusing on. You've gone through, using AI, and you went tapped into a I don't know, resume writer, and you've done all the things, right? You scheduled a call with me, right? We've gone through the process, we mapped it all out. And you're there, right? Congratulations, you secured your new position. It just so happens to be a customer success manager because that's just where my brain is right now. And now you want to think about, well, how can I now, again, that word asset for me kind of stands out thinking about beyond is how can I be an asset here? What can I do to improve, the state of work where I am to the point where, I can probably leverage that at some point and be like, well, I've been putting in work, I've been making it happen, and you can maybe begin to move up that ladder corporately if that's what you want to do, and then move into leadership and all that type of stuff. So last prompt, talking about beyond, right? What strategies can my customer success team implement to become more effective in building relationships with customers? And how can I use my education background to take a leadership role? It's a lot, right? I know. Again, you could always chunk these things out, but I was like, I feel like this is pretty solid. So with that, let's see what we get. Right now, the key thing to keep in mind here is that this is not really an all-knowing type of situation. And also that, if you're working on a team, more than likely people might be aware of some of these things. But what I found is that the formulation of a lot of these ideas that we see right here might not necessarily be, at the forefront or be introduced wherever you are. So you might come in with something based off of learning here and say, oh, well, have you all heard of, whatever? Oh, no, we've never heard of that. Then you become in a position where you can educate other people, right? Based on the research and based on the knowledge that you have. And you can continue to build from that and even, begin to extract some of these things and dig deeper into it. Like, what does this mean? What does it look like? How do I implement it? Right. My team is 6 people. What roles should each person play to make this happen? Right. Mapping out, literal kind of just like steps and process to be able to incorporate things to make this, as successful as possible. And again, this is literally just based off of you, typing in what you need and what are seeing in the results, right? And the solutions that you need based on whatever situation you're in. So again, continue to dig through this and just build off of this and do more. So I definitely hope that this was helpful and that, folks take from this and kind of take it and just kind of run with it. I definitely want to open up more of the exposure to a lot of the technology that I'm seeing, a lot of the, AI and generative tools, just so that there's not so much of the stigma around it. And honestly, I just don't want anybody to completely just go away from it and honestly just get left out. I don't want our youth and families, and definitely not our teachers, to be left behind when it comes to this, because there are a lot of great things that can, come from using this type of, technology, needs these different tools that, can make life more, a little easier. But I think, again, being very careful and mindful of things like data privacy are definitely, at the forefront. But if you're using it for, some of the purposes and the prompts and ways that I've showed it here during, our time together, then I think we'll be pretty solid, at least, starting out. And once we get more comfortable and going forward, who can say, the sky's the limit in terms of what we can produce and what we can create and continue to build together, especially. So I thank you for your time so much for tapping into this webinar. Definitely be on the lookout for more upcoming information and resources. Be sure to visit eduhustle.co. That's eduhustle.co. And for anything there, check it out and feel free to reach out as well via email at info@eduhustle.co. Thank you.